Hi everyone, welcome to week 5. Let's talk about what's going to be going on this week. By Thursday, September the 20th, your chapter questions / case study assignment is due. I know some of you have already submitted that, but to those of you that have not, that is due this Thursday. On Sunday, the chapter tests for chapters 4, 5, and 6 will be available to you from the hours of 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. that night. So I'm reducing the hours by 2 hours, but I feel that you will still have enough time to submit your test on that day. Again, that's from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. on Sunday, September the 26th. Also on that day, your discussion points are due. You can do your discussion prior to Sunday if you like, or just know that it is due on this day. I'm going to circle back to how you obtain your discussion points. Now, I need to talk a little bit about last week to tie it into this week. So if you recall, I included a document for your reference from DeKalb County Board of Health with descriptions of childhood illnesses. And the reason why I wanted to do that is that in my role as a child care administrator of a program, I received a lot of phone calls from the classroom. Hey, Miss Tammy, can you come look at this child? Is this a rash? Is this contagious? What should I do? This wasn't there yesterday. What do you think it is? So I thought it was helpful to have a document with some photographs for your reference. So take that and file that away, and hopefully it will be helpful to you at some point in your career. The next thing, I included a video on how to use an EpiPen. So I find this really helpful if you are in a situation and you have a child in your classroom that needs an EpiPen, to visualize that process of how that would look if you had to administer that EpiPen to that particular child. So let's say it's a 2-year-old child. Are you going to sit with the child in your lap? Are you going to stand behind them? Are you going to kneel? I feel that more than likely, if it were me, I would kneel behind them to administer the EpiPen. Whereas if it's a preschool age child or a school ager, I would stand behind them. Now, I realize that that video said you could have that child sit in your lap, but I'd just like for you to take that in consideration for a moment. Think about a child as a patient. Think about a child that is frightened or in distress. Do you believe that they will be able to sit still while you administer that EpiPen? I'm not so confident they would, and I wouldn't necessarily expect them to. So it's for that reason that I may have them sit in a chair, kneel behind them, or stand behind them to administer that EpiPen. So keep that in mind, if you will. And the reason why I included a video on that is that I feel that more than likely in your career, you will probably encounter a child who has an EpiPen as part of their care plan for allergic responses. So it's important for that reason. I remember one program I worked in, we had approximately 12 EpiPens for children. I think that's a lot. So I'm pretty confident that you will encounter it at some point in your career if you haven't already. Next, you had a video of how seizures look. And what's interesting about this presentation is that that was actual footage of children, real children, experiencing seizures. And it was in a clinical setting, so everyone was safe, but they were being monitored for their condition. So I think that was a unique situation for you to view a child having a seizure. Next, you had hypoglycemic versus hyperglycemic diabetics. An important thing to remember here is that with children who have any sort of medical condition, is that the management and teachers in that particular program have a very thorough understanding of the symptoms and the treatment of any condition. Now, back to your book, it talks about IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. And this has been in existence since 2004. It consists of 3 components: the IEP, or the Individual Education Plan for the child, what they're going to receive in the school setting, the Individualized Family Services Plan, or the IFSP, and the Individualized Health Plan, or the IHP. So what came to mind when I was reading about this is it took me back to that presentation or the documentary on our supersized children, where it discussed at length how it was important to involve the whole family in caring for a child who was obese. That you couldn't just expect the child to be successful if only the child was participating in a new eating regimen or weight loss program, that it really involved changes by the whole family. And this IDEA Act recognizes that as well, since it has that component in it for the family, the Individualized Family Services Plan. So that kind of stood out to me this week as well. Further on this page, IDEA has some disability categories that they identify. So I'm just going to go through those pretty quickly with you. Autism, deafblindness, deafness, developmental delay, emotional disturbance, hearing impairment, intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairments, other health impairments, specific learning disabilities, speech or language impairment, traumatic brain injury, and visual impairment, including blindness. So, I've worked with children in all of these categories with the exception of deaf-blindness. And a couple of things that came to mind when I was reading through this list that I wanted to talk to you about is my experience in working with one autistic child in particular. In his situation, part of his care plan was that he left our program each day and rode the bus to another program where he received services, and then he came back to us later in the day. So the time that he came back to us, it was at the tail end of lunch, during that transition time between lunch and rest time. And if you're currently working in the field, you know that this is a very challenging transition time on any given day. If you aren't working in the field, then you will come to appreciate this, that it is a challenging transition time. It's very active and can be very chaotic in some instances. So often when he came into the program, he just wasn't happy with what was happening. So as a result, you would see a lot of hitting the teacher, throwing food, any sort of misbehavior that could occur, it occurred. So we really wanted to look at this transition time, so we met with his mother and talked about some ideas of how we could possibly make this go smoother for him. And we came up with a couple of things, one of which is that we felt that since he had lunch at the program he was in before he came to us, maybe we didn't even need to offer him lunch. We could, well, really, we would not make it part of his routine that he would need to sit at the table with the children when he came in, since he already ate. We would invite him to sit down and kind of make it a choice. Offer the food that was there. If you want that, join us. If you don't, then you don't have to. So hopefully that would alleviate some of what our battle was. That was one thing. So we created a space for him. We used a large appliance box and cut it down to where it was very low, kind of like a boat, right? And then we had some pillows in the box and his favorite sippy cup. It had to be 1 cup specifically. So his new routine was that he would come in, he would be invited to join the teachers and children at the table if he wanted to eat. If not, he would go to his box, sit down, and observe everyone else. So most days, that's what he chose to do. He didn't want to eat anything, so he would go right to his area, sit down with his cup, and observe. And then once everyone else had settled down, he, at that time, was able to make that transition and go to his mat and rest. So we found that, that's just an example of how you could work with a special needs child in finding a very small portion of a solution of what could work for him throughout the course of the day. So that was a success story. Next, another child that came to mind when I was reading through this list was one that I worked with who had a traumatic brain injury. When I first met Bailey, he was 3 years old in our preschool room, and what I noticed about him when I met him is that he had um, a scar that went from one side of his head around the back of his head to the other side. And part of his care plan included him leaving our program every day and then returning to us. What happened with him and how he came to have a traumatic brain injury is that when he was an infant, his mother had him in the car seat carrier, and she placed the car seat with him in it on top of the car or on top of a ledge. I can't remember which, to be honest with you, but at any rate, she placed him at a significant height. The car seat fell to the ground, he fell out of it, and that's how he sustained his injury. Needless to say that from that point forward, his life completely changed. And knowing what had happened to Bailey as an infant affected and shaped how I managed my own program. For instance, when other parents would come into the program and they had their infants in their carrier seat, it was our policy that those seats could not go up on the counter in the reception area. Now, am I saying to you, fellow administrators, that you must have or adapt the same policy? No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just giving you an example of how caring for this one child in particular shaped my actions as a program administrator. So my question to you is this, and this could be your first discussion question if you choose to respond to this one. So I ask you this: can you think of a specific example of how working with a particular child or group of children has shaped your viewpoint or your practices? So moving on, the second thing I'd like for you to consider is this: how solid is your program's policy with respect to accepting special needs children into your care? Case in point, I worked at a program that served children ages 6 weeks to 5 years. A mother was offered a slot for her child in one of our infant rooms. And prior to him starting, we heard, not from her, but through the grapevine, if you will, that this child had a feeding tube. So it kind of makes me question, what happened in this process of offering her a slot? Did the desk clerk say to her, does your child have a special need? If so, what is it? How do we provide care for this child? That sort of thing, because that's what should have happened before the child came in. But even though we received late notice of the special need, we were still able to call in our medical advisor, and he accompanied the child and the mom on the child's first day of care, and he was able to show us and give us hands-on training for how to feed this infant with the feeding tube, how to care for the feeding tube, the proper sanitation, and give us hands-on experience, which was valuable beyond measure. He also left us with some written correspondence to refer to in how to further care for the child. So another thing that could have been considered or should have been considered during intake, were the right questions asked. Maybe the desk clerk did say to this parent, does your child have a special need? And maybe she thought to herself, well, the Child Development Center, they should know how to feed a child with a feeding tube. Well, as I said before, none of our teachers knew how to do it. The training and curriculum specialists didn't know how to do it. So that's why we needed specialized training in how to do it to care for this child. Another question to ask would be, would the staff to child ratio need to be adjusted? Who's going to provide the training that you need to care for this child? And can we in fact meet the needs of this child in our particular setting? Also, once you receive the child into care, what evaluation process will exist for you to ensure that the child's needs are in fact being met? So, in light of this particular scenario, let me ask you this: what would you do if a child with a special need enrolled in your program? Give me a scenario, real or fictitious, and walk me through it. What do you think should be addressed? And feel free to address or elaborate on the example that I gave you with the child and the feeding tube. So, third, because more than likely you will encounter a child with food allergies or food intolerances. Think about this scenario. In our programs, in many of our programs, we do family-style dining. So the food is prepared on-site in the kitchen. It comes to the classroom, and let's say you have 2 ratio groups of children in one classroom. So you have a table or 2 tables set up with all the components that you need for family-style dining. The children are encouraged to serve themselves, to pass the bowls of food around. They're also encouraged to clean up after themselves at the conclusion of the meal service. So they're going to take their plate and scrape it off into a food bin, and they'll take their milk and dump out what they didn't drink into another container, and they will put their plates on a cart and clean up their area. All right, so that's how that should look. And it's going to look different depending on the age of the child. It's going to look different in a 1-year-old classroom versus how it's going to look in a preschool age classroom. For this particular example of what I want you to think about, this is in a 2-year-old classroom. So what did I want to say to you? The care plan for food allergies or intolerances could include a restriction of foods, substitution of foods, and the plan of what to do if a child ingests a food that he or she is allergic to. It could include administering Benadryl. It could include administering an EpiPen, and that, of course, will be determined by a physician. So the example that I want to share with you is about a child named Rocco. He had a milk allergy, and we knew that his allergy was labeled as an ingestant. All right. So we knew that he could not drink milk. He had the substitution, which was soy milk. We also knew that he could not have food with milk in it. So his treatment plan included us administering Benadryl in case he ingested food with milk or he drank milk by accident. So one thing we learned the hard way with Rocco is that milk could not even come into contact with his skin. So the definition of this was contactant, I believe, that's in your textbook. One day, milk got on his skin, he had an allergic reaction, and we had to administer Benadryl. So based on this scenario and this incident, I made changes as an administrator. First of all, even though a teacher was required to sit with him during meal service, I made the stipulation that the lead teacher would be present with him for all meals that he had in our program. And if the lead teacher was out, this task would be assigned to a specific individual in her absence. So one particular person was always present. All right. In addition to that, I wanted to give some distance or have some distance between him and other children who were eating that had milk or milk products. So beside the table, the square table that the children sat at, I added a round table that scooted up against the square table. So that provided some distance for Rocco and his teacher to sit at during meal service. Well, the training and curriculum specialist in my program took issue with this. Her point being was that I was separating the child based on his specific allergy. So here's my question to you. Knowing what I just shared with you about this particular situation, how would you proceed with the feedback provided by the training and curriculum specialist? Would you continue to do things the same way? And if you did, how would you defend your position? If you did things differently, defend your position for that. So that is another discussion topic that you can address. The fourth thing that I want you to consider is this. Back to the EpiPens. I know, I can't seem to stop talking about the EpiPens. So let's say that you have a child in your program that has an EpiPen and she is allergic to bees. Here's my question to you. Where should the EpiPen be stored? Should it be locked up? And should the EpiPen accompany her on the playground? Same set of questions. Now think about a child that has a food allergy to wheat. Where should the EpiPen be stored? Should it be locked up? Should the EpiPen accompany him on the playground? If you do take EpiPens on the playground, how do the teachers manage this? I want you to think about that if you are choosing this discussion question to address for your discussion points. So next, moving on to Chapter 5, this addresses medication administration. How would you handle medication administration in your program? Would you follow the procedure described in Chapter 5? If not, would you change it to meet the needs of the children in your program? How would you handle a situation where a child was given the wrong medication? Describe that scenario for me from beginning to end, because I read through what was in Chapter 5, and that plan, that looks good. I'm not going to say that it doesn't, but it doesn't address what you need to do or what you should do in case a child receives the wrong medication. I want you to think about that and walk me through it if it happened in your program. Lastly, Chapter 6. Part of what Chapter 6 addresses is sudden infant death syndrome. So, part of the training that I use regarding this topic when I have been in the role of training as a curriculum specialist is an article about a situation that happened in a military child care center. I'm going to read this article to you, and if you aren't comprehending what I'm saying by me reading it to you, you're able to go back and read it yourself. I'm going to post a link to it. So whatever your preference is, but I still want to share it with you like this. And I'm going to paraphrase some of this. All right. So this is entitled Parents Want Justice After Daycare Death. This happened in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. This little boy's name is Santino. They call him Sonny, his nickname. So when Sonny Degenhard came into the world on October 5th, 2011, his laughter came easy. For parents Rachel and Jason Degenhard, that laughter now lives only on video. Sonny suffocated on the floor during tummy time while a child care worker got the room ready for the day by cleaning bottles and putting sheets on mattresses. The baby boy was on life support for 6 days before his death was official on March 15, 2012. The last time I saw him, he was a beautiful, healthy boy, Jason Degenhard said. Now his wife spends every Friday reading to their 4-month-old son at his gravesite. The first time I got any details was when I requested it from the state's investigation, and I received it in September, 6 months later, says Jason Degenhard, who has tirelessly pored over the documents trying to understand how his son died without child care workers noticing. The camera captures Sonny's struggle. A surveillance camera captured the scene as Sonny struggled to breathe while on his stomach, unable to roll over. The day's events were documented in reports by Fort Bragg investigators in the North Carolina Division of Child Development and Early Education. 5:30 a.m. Rachel Degenhard drops Sonny off at the child care and places him in a bouncy seat. The daycare's procedures state that a child should not be left in a bouncy seat for longer than 15 minutes. However, staff members leave Sonny in the seat for about 90 minutes. 7:12 a.m. 2 staff members take Sonny and 3 other children to their assigned classroom. 7:13 a.m. Child care worker Vera Grant places Sonny on his stomach on a red vinyl mat. She is responsible for watching Sonny and 3 other children ages 9 months, 13 months, and 17 months. 7:26 a.m. A cook comes in the room points at Sonny and says he doesn't look right, but no one checks on him. 7:30 a.m. Another staff member comes in the room and says Sonny looks funny, but no one checks on him. 7:32 a.m. Grant picks up Sonny, puts him in a crib, and realizes he's not breathing. She puts him on a changing table and begins CPR by giving him breaths, but no chest compressions. A school nurse and a medic, who was dropping off her child, rush into the room and perform CPR on Sonny. A staff member calls 911. Emergency workers arrived about 5 minutes later and took Sonny to Womack Army Medical Center. He was transferred to the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit at Cape Fear Valley Medical Center, where doctors determined he had suffered a brain injury consistent with oxygen deprivation. The Degenhards then made the difficult decision to take their son off life support after they were told he did not have any brain activity. Sonny died at 12:20 a.m. on March 15, 2012, and his organs were donated. Child Care Center changes name after Sonny's death. Pope Child Development Center dismissed Grant, who said in interviews with investigators that she followed the same routine each day and that she was focused on getting everyone to the table to eat at the same time the morning that Sonny suffocated. Public records requested by WRAL Investigates team show that Grant was current in her training, including pediatric first aid and infant-toddler safe sleep and sudden infant death risk reduction. She told Army investigators she had 36 years of experience in child care. Nearly a year later, Fort Bragg investigators say the criminal case is still pending. The North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services declined an interview but released a statement saying it is monitoring the center's training and preventive measures. I'm going to skip through this part where it talks about the name of the facility and things of that nature. It goes on, this article goes on to discuss some other things that happened at this same Child Development Center at Fort Bragg. On March 15, 2012, 6 days after Sonny suffocated, a 1-year-old toddler walked out of the daycare unnoticed and went outside to a fenced-in playground by himself. The child's mother, who had come to pick him up, saw him standing outside. About the same time, a staff member saw the boy at the door and alerted the worker in charge of the child, according to the report. Fort Bragg's investigators noted that the 1-year-old easily opened the door, no alarm sounded, and that caregivers did not notice him leaving the building. On March 27, 2012, the father of a 3-year-old boy complained that a female daycare worker struck his child on the buttocks as she changed the boy's clothes. The worker was temporarily moved to administrative duties, but the allegation was deemed unfounded and she was allowed to return to her normal duties on April 26, 2012. The state's tummy time training is not very specific. As in Sonny's case, tummy time can be dangerous for infants who lack neck strength, which is why experts recommend babies sleep on their backs. However, when they are awake, short periods of supervised tummy time are necessary to help babies develop their muscles and avoid getting a flat head. Fort Bragg's tummy time training is more specific and requires a staff member to be sitting on the floor within arm's reach of the child while maintaining eye contact, a rule that was broken in Sonny's case. Fort Bragg's tummy time rules also state no more than 3 to 5 minutes twice per day for a child who cannot roll over, increasing to 10 minutes twice per day for a child who can roll over. Maximum of 20 minutes twice per day for an infant who is getting ready to pull themselves up. Despite Fort Bragg's policy, many of the workers the Army interviewed after Sonny's death did not recall the details of the supervision policy. Fort Bragg spokesman Tom McCollum says the Army recognizes the horrible tragedy of Sonny's death and remains committed to learning from it. There was a lot of extensive training that followed this, and that was all part of our review of was there something we could have done that could prevent it. And what I want to interject here is that the death in this Army Child Development Program really affected all of us in military child care because we all had to examine our practices, and as a result, many things changed on how we administered our program based on this incident. I'm still struggling with the fact that we had to learn the hard way, but practices were changed based on this incident. That's what I wanted you to know. So I will leave you with this on this topic. The Degenhardts remember 4 months of pure love. The Degenhardts say they are frustrated because their son's death was preventable. They want resolution to the states and the Army's investigation and for the public to know what happened to their son so no child dies the same way. I have a vested interest in my son's life, and I don't feel that the Army and the state have the same vested interest, Jason Degenhardt said. Not one person has sent us a card, called to apologize, sent us condolences, sympathies, anything. There has been absolutely no response to us as soldiers or parents to say, we're sorry. At Sonny's funeral, Jason Degenhardt delivered his son's eulogy and talked about how he and his wife had prayed for years to have a baby. 4 years of our patience turned into 4 months of pure love. He was alive for exactly 142 days, and unofficially, I think he received 10,000 kisses, he said. I can actually say that I helped bring him into this world as I watched him be pulled from his mother's womb, and I held him as he left for Heaven's Gate. The grieving father remembered special times with his son, including watching Jeopardy and cooking shows together and cuddling after bath time. During the eulogy, Jason Degenhardt also read a letter that his wife had written for their son's funeral. I want my heart to memorize each one of these moments. Things not captured by video or camera. His touch, his smell, the emotion that consumed our family whenever we looked at him, Rachel Degenhardt wrote. One of life's greatest blessings is children. I'm very grateful for the time God allowed us to have this most precious and divine gift from heaven. There are no words of comfort or length of time that can take away the pain of losing a child. I look forward to the day that we can hold him again and hear his laughter and see his wonderful smile. So, based on that, my question to you is, how could baby Santino's death have been prevented? If you were in charge of this program, what would your plan include to prevent this from happening again, and how would you implement those changes? So that concludes my talk to you for the week, and I look forward to reading your discussion questions. And just know that the way I want you to do the discussion questions, choose one, respond to that question, answer it individually. There will be no group assignments or no team assignments for this particular discussion question. Read what other people have to say. Feel free to respond to them. I think it will be very interesting reading this week. So I thank you so much for your attention, and I hope that you have a good week. As always, contact me with any questions or concerns that you may have.